Essl. Wer die vergangenen Tage, wer am Montag hier war, hat ihn schon erlebt beim Roundtable und bei der offenen Probe auch am Samstag, am vorigen Samstag. Karlheinz Essl ist Professor an der Musikuniversität für Komposition und es werden heute Abend 2 Stücke von ihm gespielt, Colorado und Serquitur VII. Und jetzt freuen wir uns auf eine etwa 50-minütige, 60-minütige Lecture. Es werden noch ein paar Leute nachkommen, aber wir werden trotzdem. Ja.
So, welcome. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming. I suggested I speak in English. Yes. Everybody understands English and makes it much easier for all of us. When Lars asked me about the topic I want to speak, in the beginning I was not sure what to do, but then I thought, okay, it's a festival about saxophone, and I have written some pieces for saxophone. I worked a lot with saxophonists, so I thought I would like to make a little journey, a travel through my history, so to speak, starting with an early piece that I wrote in 1990, when I was just 30 years old. It's one of my early pieces for the early period. And then I will move on to the 3rd millennium. And those 4 pieces all include saxophones in different combinations and also with electronics. The question is why I'm so much attracted by the saxophone. There are several reasons. One was that in my student days I became friends with Markus Weiss. He's a saxophonist in Switzerland. He's I think the teacher of Lars. We were both students at this time, and through him I came in contact with this instrument, in close contact. Of course you do the saxophone, but it's something different if you have a friend who shows you how to play it. Then there was another reason that maybe we wait for the people to come in. Welcome, please. Have your seats. Enough space for everybody. I'm just speaking about the fascination of saxophone. What is the fascinating thing about the saxophone? It's an instrument which has quite a short history. So if I compare, for example, to a violin or a cello or a harpsichord or a piano, the history goes back into the Baroque or pre-Baroque area. And there's a lot of repertoire for these instruments, a lot of great compositions. And all these compositions create a sort of aura around the instrument. For example, if I go to a piano and just hit a key in the piano, it's not just the key that you hear, the tone, but it's everything. At least for me, I hear Mozart and Brahms and Strindberg. But with the saxophone, as it is so young, it has not so much connotation from the sound. And the saxophone became a classical instrument quite late. So in the beginning it was more used for brass bands and later on jazz. And then Russia came and tried to cultivate this instrument like a string quartet. So it has at least 2 sides. One is a very unknown and wild side, and one is a very cultivated and subtle side. So I'm more interested in the wild aspects of the saxophone, with all its colorful expressions that are possible, and which were also cultivated in music which is not related to classical music, like jazz music, for example. And the first piece that I wrote for the saxophone was written for the ensemble of Markus Weiss, Saxes, which was founded in the late 1980s. So there were 4 musicians. One was Serge Bertocchi, who is still around, and 2 others. And they asked me to write a piece. Please have a seat. As they were planning to make their first CD recording and asked to write a piece. And I suggested not to write a quartet, because the sujet of a saxophone quartet was a little bit too outmoded for me at this time. So I thought I would like to use only 3 instruments and 3 tenor saxophones, 3 of the same kind. This piece was written with the idea of having acoustic instruments like a saxophone, but what I was interested to use them in a different way. I was more thinking about electronic music when I wrote the piece, thinking about those 3 saxophones as little devices which can generate sound particles which are very densely interwoven, and by this trying to create a sort of new sonority, which is not so much related to the beautiful world of saxophone quartets like it was cultivated by ensembles like the Quartet. In my statement on Monday, where we spoke about live electronics, I made a very bland comment statement saying that I'm not interested in the sound in electronic music. This was a sort of paradox I was using. I'm very much interested in sound, but not in a superficial way, that I wanted to have these nice electronic sounds. I'm more interested how those interesting sounds could be produced. And at this time I was not working with electronic music as a medium, with loudspeakers, but I had were more connecting to the old days in the 1950s, when the genre electronic music was invented in Paris and also in Cologne, and especially in Cologne with Karlheinz Essl. There was the idea of creating music from scratch, not going back to history, not using forms or concepts that came from history, but to go back to the table and make an analysis of the atoms, of the molecules of sound. And this brought me later in contact with computers and using computer programs which I developed myself in order to create those situations where I could use a computer to generate or help me to generate musical scores which are played by instruments but doesn't sound so instrumental at all. So this was the starting point of this piece. Close the gap. For 3 tenor saxophones, which was written for the Saxes ensemble. I have, by the way, I have some scores here. Maybe I can. It's easier maybe to read the scores from the paper, not from the. You can please give it back to me. These are my last copies. So what you see here is quite dense and very precisely notated musical structure. There's a lot of different sound types: slap tongues, trills, Flatterzunge, some micro melodic things. And the idea was that those 3 instruments are not playing like 3 parts like soloists in a chamber music context, but as one sort of hyper instrument which is created out of 3 different sources. And you see, there are the second part of this piece is a long pause of 4 quarters. So this is also gave the name to this piece, Close the Gap, because in the beginning I was always making short sections of expressive saxophone sounds, subdivided by gaps, and those gaps are filled more and more through the piece. And this was also a sort of political statement at this time, because this piece was written when the Kuwait war between Kuwait, Iraq, Kuwait, and the US started, and this was it showed very clearly that there is a sort of clash of cultures between the North and the South. And I was relating to an article that was written years before by an artist, theoretician Leslie Fiedler, who published an article about close the gap. It was code, closing the gap between the questions. And it was funny that this article was not published in an art magazine, but in the Playboy. It was a sort of relationship to this political situation. But before I speak too long, I will show you another page in the middle. So that shows you that those gaps that you had before now are filled with very soft sounds, flowing sounds. And later on, in the end, everything is going into the whole ensemble goes into those sort of whispering sounds that are creating a very different situation at the very end of the piece. I think we should listen to a few minutes in the beginning, and then I play a short video excerpt from another performance we did in Panek some years ago. And so the first is with the saxophone ensemble, and the second one is with Vienna saxophone quartet.
CD I heard with contemporary saxophone, classical saxophone, and so this piece was also Xas by Xenakis, and so this is.
Oh yeah, reconnection. Super. Okay, now I play the end of the piece with another interpretation of Wiener Saxophone Trio. Without Lars. He played also at this time, but not in this piece.
I just came back from the States, I didn't have time to rehearse.
So it's a video recording. Sound quality is not the best, but it shows a little bit the interaction between the musicians. 1990. So the next piece, only for saxophones, was written 15 years later. But in the meantime, I've written several ensemble pieces using saxophone. There was one for the Klangforum called Cross the Border. So this was for solo saxophone, solo drums, and solo double bass, and a large ensemble. Markus played the solo part of this piece. Okay, the next piece I will speak today is the piece that you will hear in the evening, the last piece of the concert, late at night, with 4 wonderful musicians, which happen to sit here, more or less over here. Yes. It was really a pleasure to work with you. I think it sounds very, very good. So I have one score left for circulation. It has a strange title, Colorado. Spanish word means color, and is also the name of a river which flows through America, starts somewhere in Arizona, goes through the desert, and finally ends in the Mexican Gulf. When I was traveling through America in 2005 with my family, we came across this river and followed it for a while with the car, going through the Mojave Desert. And this river always changes its color. So I have some photos here. So this is a river that could also be in Austria. So this is the beginning of the Colorado River, where it's quite normal, a little brownish color-wise.
It's small.
And?
It's small. It's
small. It's the
when you
beginning.
Think Colorado, you think of something.
It's beginning. It becomes very big. Yes. So like here, for example, this could be, I don't know. Maybe it's the Grand Canyon because it also goes through the Grand Canyon. So it's quite a large river, and now you see, wow, greenish and this wonderful landscape here. Look at this. It's amazing, huh? Finally, something.
I think you should invite the quartet there to really experience.
Yes, we should play in the Grand Canyon. No, we don't need any electronics for that.
Oh.
The electronics are already there.
Well, you can do as together. No? You can put the electronic on
Yes, on loudspeakers. Yes, with batteries. Yes.
as together, no?
So this was a piece written for 40 instruments. Baritone, tenor, alto, and soprano. And there is this idea of cover changes in this piece. So the piece starts only with breaths. This is the second piece. So the first page, the second page. The first page is nearly empty, so I didn't show it. And the beginning is just the breath of the players. But the breath the players play through the saxophone without mouthpiece. So the saxophone is used as a filter, as an acoustic filter for the breath sounds. And as we have 4 different instruments, those filters act differently on the sounds. And later on, those sounds gets more quality, more substance. So they get some harmonic content later, or some rhythmical microphrases. And all these sounds that are produced by the players are fed into a computer program, which I've written in the language Max MSP. Some of you know this is a common language that was developed at IFECOM in Paris. And what I'm doing is that there are some red indications in the score. This is my part, so that shows what elements I put into my computer program and what I'm doing with this. The computer program itself is something I call a particle accelerator. So it takes elements into it and starts spinning them around in space on 4 loudspeakers. There are lots of different layers of different speeds and different movements which are overlapping. And based on this particle accelerator, like in CERN, in Genève, I can improvise by using different electronic sound processes like ring modulation, harmonizer, flangers. This is something I do live like a fifth instrumentalist. So the electronic is not something that is always changing with each performance, and the piece has been performed several times, with always with different musicians, and now we have come to another step, another stage of this piece, which I like very much. I show you another page of the score. Somewhere in the middle. So you see that you have now some sort of rhythmical figures, time clicks, key clicks, slap tongues, and also some long flowing sounds, mostly multiphonics, and sometimes also full alto. This is towards the end of the piece, where I only at the end work with certain multiphonics. So the beginning is with breath, and the end is with multiphonic sounds, which are not normal sounds. They have an inharmonic spectrum. Shortly after I've written Close the Gap, I was invited to write a piece for IRCAM. So this is this computer music studio in Paris, which was founded by Pierre Boulez. And when I came to IRCAM in '92, I started to discover the possibilities of live electronics. Before I was working with computers, but not in order to create electronic music, but to use it for composition of instrumental scores. But then, when I worked at IRCAM on this commission, I became very much acquainted with all these technologies and possibilities of computers. At this time, this was a big machine called the Next. It was a black cube with a very, very expensive sound processor. So this would have costed something like 50,000 euros a machine. And nowadays we have these little laptops which cost $2,000 and can do more with this machine at this time. So this is a big advantage of technological progress. I have a little video which was done during the first performance, the first rehearsal of the piece in my studio, 2 minutes, which I would like to play to you, especially because the video is so nice. It was done from the ceiling of my studio, where you can see in a perspective of a bird. You can look on the 5 musicians, how they play together. It's somewhere in the middle of the piece. Tonight. The third piece was written shortly afterwards, in 2006, and is completely acoustic. It's a piece for 4 alto saxophones, which are not standing on a stage, but they are positioned in space, so that they are circled around the audience. And the funny thing is that it is a sort of open form piece, which is notated like a chess board. So this is the score of the piece, the score that is used by all 4 musicians. So it's a grid of 7 times 7 fields, and each field has a certain musical motif. And the idea of the piece is that the 4 musicians start at different corners of the piece. So number 1, for example, starts in the left upper corner, where number 2 in the bottom right corner, and number 3 here and number 4 there. And each one follows its own path. So number 1 goes downwards. It makes a sort of spiral towards the middle. There is this middle field here. You see the middle field, and it says improvise. So there are some pitches written, and the musicians, if they arrive there, start to improvise musicians. So everybody goes through the same fields, plays all the same fields, but in a completely different order. And there is a very important indication that the musicians are always listening what's happening. So they play one motif and listen what the others are doing, and then they make a pause, and then they see the next motif that they are supposed to play. And when they have the player has the feeling that she should start again, she plays the next motif according to the context that the others are creating. So that means that it's not just a random piece where everybody plays his own thing, not listening. Like if you play John Cage music, it's not supposed that you listen. It's supposed that you do your job and play. As you maybe you remember the Cage project that we did here together at the conservatorium. But here is it different. So you play and listen and decide when to continue. But the sequence, the individual sequence for each musician is given. So number 1 knows exactly after the long B, he goes to this ricochet figure afterwards. But when he starts this, he can decide by himself. So this creates a very nice interaction between the 4 players. And every time you play a piece, it's completely different because the synchronization is not given. But how does it work? How is it possible to combine all those musical elements with the other? The reason is they're using the same harmonic material. This is a series of pitches which is prearranged, and you can see it as a large 12-tone chord which is spread about the entire range of the instrument. And it's a chord which contains all intervals. It's the so-called intervals, all interval series. And by this, all sounds fit harmonically together. I think I have a recording here. Yes, it was played by another saxophone ensemble from Vienna, 4 saxes. Maybe you heard about them. This was played 5 years ago in the Concerthaus in Vienna. Originally, the origin of this piece was an electronic composition I did a year before. It was a sound installation which was running in open space near the Danube as part of the Donau Festival for 3 or 4 weeks. It was a collaboration with an artist, a visual artist, who planted light buoys in a big basin of water. So near the Danube there was a plant where they produced large ocean ships. And in this, one of these big pools where they set the boats in the water, it was used for this light installation. And I was placing loudspeakers around this pool. It was a very large environment of several hundred meters. And those loudspeakers were hidden. And on the loudspeakers were some electronic sounds played. But as this was not possible to connect the loudspeakers together to one central playing unit, each loudspeaker had a CD player and played a CD, a pre-composed CD, which was played in random, in shuffle mode. And in order to create a situation where all the sounds would fit together, I had the idea of using this fixed harmonic structure for the whole piece. And afterwards, I mean, the sounds on this installation were completely different, no saxophone sound. It was just some sounds that were taken from a single stroke of a church bell. But then when I was thinking about transforming this piece into instrumental music, I had this idea of the 4 instruments and the notation on the chessboard. And out in this series of 7x7, there are several compositions. There's one for the saxophone and the variant for clarinets, but it's basically the same piece. And there's a completely different one for trombones, written for the trombone attraction ensemble of Vienna, and one for electric guitars, written for Svergen ensemble from Belgium. Please have a seat. There are 2 seats for you. So this will now lead me to the last piece. Serquitur VII, which is also played tonight in the concert. Played by Christina. You see here? Yes, you see her. This was a piece dedicated to Lars Mlekusch and written for him, and played and premiered by him long ago, 5 years ago. Serquitur VII, so there's a number, that means there are others. There's a Serquitur I and Serquitur III, of course. So this is a series of pieces.
Something with sequencers?
Yes, exactly. Very good, very clever. It has to do with the sequencer of period. It's the attempt to write solo pieces for solo instruments with electronics, with live electronics. And the idea was that the electronic is so simple that it can be operated by the musician him or herself. So he doesn't need a big truck of equipment and lots of technicians and sound engineers. But it's just a little setup, a laptop, a microphone, 2 loudspeakers, a pedal, that's everything. Or each piece could be played in this setup. They are very different. In Serquitur VII, I have some scores here. Scores that you can keep. This this. The idea is creating a sort of canon with the electronics. So everything that is played from the instrument is fed into a computer program, and that creates a sort of 8-part canon. But it's a canon which works completely different than the canons we know from the history. It's a canon where the entrance delays between the canon voices is changing. So there is a sort of progression, so that in the beginning the answer comes quite late, and the second answer comes a little bit earlier, and so on. In the middle, the fifth answer is quite short afterwards, and then there's a progress towards the end, which stretches the entrances again. So by this means, the canon creates a lot of different combinations by itself. And there comes another point, that those 8 canon voices are not playing all the time. So there is a sort of conductor built inside the program, which makes decisions which canon part is played. So there's always a change in the assignment of the different voices, so which breaks this foreseeability of the canon. And then, on this canon that is created, electronic sound processes are taking the power. So using methods of adding artificial overtones, or by destroying the sounds, or by filtering them, or putting reverb. And these are sets of presets, which are telling the computer at this point, for example, number 2, this is the end of the first line. Number 2, the preset number 2. This would automatically change the setting of the electronic sound transformers. So what the player does is basically playing the score, and when she comes to the next number of the presets, she just has to press the pedal or hit the key on the computer, and then the computer knows, okay, now we are here, and then he knows what to do. Today, I will create a piece together with you, because I'm here, and it relieves her a bit of handling the computer and using a pedal, and because sometimes if you're not used to this, this can be distracting. But in fact, it's also normally done by every soloist who knows himself. This series of Serquiturs was written between 2008 and 2010, and besides using classical instruments like a violin or a cello, or even a saxophone and the clarinet, I'm using also more exotic instruments, like a kalimba, which is an African instrument, a thumb piano, a toy piano, electric guitar, and also a voice. So there is a piece for mezzo-sopran, which also has a text, but the text is composition of mine. It has no meaning. It's just syllables and vowels. It sounds a little bit Latin, but it has no real meaning. So, but now I would like to play you the piece Serquitur VII, a video that we did in Bernay with Lars Mlekusch in a very nice church, in a church, a parish church of a cloister, a monastery, with a beautiful acoustic. So we are standing on the altar, so to speak, and playing there. this was just the beginning of the piece. The rest you can hear tonight. Well, this is more or less the end of my presentation. I think I will speak around 15 minutes. So, are there any questions? Please.
I have a question because I'm a composer and I'm interested in your pitch organization. It's important the harmony, relationship between some modes. Yes.
Very strict harmonic setup was in 7x7, so based on this special constructed 12-tone row with certain intervals, which has a relationship to the natural overtone series. It appears like a distorted overtone series, but it contains all 12 notes. In this piece, maybe you heard this material in the beginning is a Messiaen scale. It only composed of major and minor seconds, and this was used as a field where the tones get more and more extincted, so that at the end you only have one of those 8 notes. So this is a whole series of 8 notes, and in the beginning it starts in the middle, then it extends itself, and then it goes up to the highest. This was where I stopped. Maybe you can see it in the score. So it starts here with the A, E, E sharp, and then it opens, so to speak, the range of the tones, and then in the end, you see, goes to the high A, and the multiphonic, and then something new happens again. So the harmonic content is for me very important. But it's something which I'm doing in a very intuitive manner.
Process spontaneously.
Yes. I mean, I'm making some constructions, but I'm not using series normally. So I'm using sound consolidation intervals. I'm using also complementary intervals and cells of intervals which I transform. But a lot of those harmonic construction is done by experimenting and also by listening. Any other question?
Sind denn die Sequituren alle mit kanonischen Veränderungen oder Formen, oder ist das nur speziell?
Nein, es sind alle. Das ist das Prinzip von den Stücken. Nur die Kanons werden zum Teil so stark überarbeitet, dass man sie als Kanon nicht wahrnimmt. Hier hört man sie sehr gut, aber das Stück für E-Gitarre zum Beispiel, das ist ein richtiges Klangstück mit sehr vielen rockartigen Klängen. Und da wird die Kanonik in dem Sinn gar nicht so hörbar, sondern das klingt dann eher so wie eine Wall of Sound, die sich aufbaut. Sie hat versucht, jedes Stück anders zu machen, so immer wieder mit dieser Idee des Kanons, der zerstört und destruiert wird, aber in jedem Instrument etwas anderes abzubilden ist.
Kannst du vom Programm oder ist es
Von der Kirche?
von der Kirche? Diese Hall.
Der Hall kommt von der Kirche.
Ah ja, okay.
Ja.
Aber das
Ja.
Programm ist rein.
Im Programm gibt es auch einen Hallparameter, aber der ändert sich. Der ist flexibel. Aber das war die Aufnahme von der Kirche. Eine gotische Kirche mit sehr viel Naturhall.
Und Sie hatten da keinen Halt in der Übung.
Ich habe einen Hall drinnen, aber der ist ganz sanft, ganz subtil.
Ah, okay.
Und in der Kirche hatten wir so.
Ja, genau.
Also ich muss ganz offen sagen, ich arbeite sehr gern mit Naturräumen, mit akustischen Räumen, die ein Eigenleben haben. Also das Schlimmste für mich sind tote Räume,
Okay.
schalltote Räume oder einfach moderne Konzertsäle, die keine Eigenakustik haben. Also mindestens 2,5 Sekunden Nachhall ist immer gut. Viele Reflexionen.
Du leidest heute Abend dann.
Ja, heute Abend werden wir sehr viel mit den Elektronen machen. Ne? Ihr seid ziemlich trocken da unten. Ne?
Voll. Das ist jetzt weniger schlimm, als ich bisher dachte eigentlich.
Der Lieblingshall, wenn du mich schon fragst, die Säulenhalle im Parlament. Die 12 Sekunden Nachhall.
Wo ist das? Im Parlament?
Im Parlament, in Wien. Da gibt es eine Säulenhalle, die ist, weiß nicht, wie hoch ist die? 8 Meter oder 10 oder 12 Meter hoch, riesig. Alles aus Marmor, Marmorfußboden, Marmorsäulen, Marmorwände. Ich habe dort einmal dafür ein Orchesterstück geschrieben, für diese Akustik, und habe mit der Akustik gearbeitet. Also du machst einmal so, da bleibt einfach eine Hallfahne von 12 Sekunden stehen. Und das ist toll. Also das ist wirklich, da braucht man keine Elektronik mehr. Das kann man mit ein paar Instrumenten ganz tolle Musik machen. Okay. Noch Fragen?
Aber so feingliedrige und virtuose Sachen wären nochmal Schmirage natürlich. Oder so.
Genau, richtig.
Das interessiert sich auch nicht so.
Oh ja, aber das macht, da arbeitet halt nicht mehr so dran. Ne? Ich meine, mich interessiert es eigentlich schon immer, dass auch im Ensemble, dass sich die Klänge verbinden. Dass das halt, also mich interessiert weniger das Diskursive als das Verbindende, wo halt viele Instrumente zusammenspielen, aber gemeinsam eine neue Art von Sound erzeugen. Das ist meine spezielle Kammeristik. Aber wie gesagt, dieses Close the Gap, was wir am Anfang gehört haben, kommt doch aus einer anderen Zeit, wo sehr viel feingliedrige Gestalten sind, die sich miteinander vernetzen und also nicht jetzt so verschmieren, ja, klanglich, sondern eher ganz präzise und sehr artikuliert sind.
Und trotzdem erkennt man schon Parallelen ab.
Ja, das ist schon ein Weg. Ne?
Dann gibt es noch Fragen, sonst. Herzlichen Dank, Karlheinz. Heute um 18 Uhr. Ich glaube, es gibt auch eine kurze Einführung, oder? Haben wir gesagt.
Ja,
Ah.
ich weiß nicht.